Warriors, please meet Tori Curbelo. Tori is, and I am so honored, a member of the Lynn's Warriors Advisory Council. But her terrific job is, let's see, Director of Education, Policy, and Advocacy at LifeWay Network here in New York. We're going to really get into that. Tori will explain everything. It's all about the survivors, and that's a big part of Lynn's Warriors. And the website is lifewaynetwork.org. So welcome, Tori Curbelo.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thanks for having me on.
Of course. You are one of my favorites, I have to say.
Yes, absolutely.
I explained to everybody, let's start with, what's the mission statement of LifeWay Network and what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. LifeWay Network was founded in 2007 with the mission of ensuring that every survivor of human trafficking, and that's all forms of human trafficking, sex, labor, organ, you name it, are connected, free, and strong. So in carrying out our mission, we provide both safe housing to the women survivors and also provide education to the general public, because we believe that both of those go hand in hand, taking the learnings of what we do in the safe house and bringing that out into the public. So it's not just staying amongst our internal team, but really bringing that out there so that we can learn from it.
Well, we know that education and raising awareness with the public, and then also taking care of that survivor, is what it's all about. And we always discuss, there are not enough resources for the survivor. There's a lack of housing for the survivor. And certainly the pandemic and we're still in it.
Yeah.
Things were looking up in June, a couple of months ago, and now it seems to be sliding a little bit back into, we're not sure what's going on. Describe that whole thing, because I know you started this job right at the beginning of the pandemic, which I don't know how you did that, but you did, because you're a committed warrior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, before we get into that, first, how did you get into all of this? Let's start with your history a little bit. Tell us about you.
Yeah, once upon a time. My journey started really from being passionate about social justice issues generally, but then finding out about human trafficking and recognizing that it's an issue that affects each and every one of us in some way, shape, or form. A lot of what perpetuates human trafficking is harmful social norms, cultural norms, our buying practices, things that we can't just blame on a dictator or someone else. It's something that we can all get involved with. And the more I learned about that, the more that compelled me to want to learn more and also find ways of taking action, because it felt so daunting to learn about. So my first experience was launching a podcast for the End Trafficking Project at UNICEF USA. I had been an intern on a separate department, but I had pitched this to them as a way of taking their awareness raising activities to a new platform, to new audiences outside of where they had traditionally provided education. And then from there, I took on more opportunities, from pitching to do a training at the United Nations. And then I got called to be a regular briefer there. I started developing resources, forming partnerships, and I decided that's what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing. I stepped away from it to work in family homelessness, but I really miss this issue particularly. I feel like there's so much more that we have to do. So I've continued to pursue this and find different ways of continuing to bring the movement forward.
I'm talking with Tori Curbelo, Director of Policy, Advocacy, Education, everything at LifeWay Network, lifewaynetwork.org here in New York. You know what I love about you, Tori, is that you touch upon and are involved in things we don't talk about enough. You mentioned organ harvesting.
Yes.
We know about sex trafficking. That's what most people hear. They hear human trafficking, and then they don't really know what to make of that kind of thing. So I'm convinced they hear human trafficking and they kind of block it out because they're not really sure what that's about. You touched upon organ, harvesting, and labor. I was just reading yesterday about the cotton bag. Did you see that article at all in the New York Times? That the cotton,
yeah.
And I'm like, Wow. So, and you're involved in all of that. So there's so many issues people can easily get involved in, but it takes education, and it
Yeah.
takes the raising awareness, and you're just full speed ahead and doing all of that. Now tell us, I have a million questions for you. I want to go into this pandemic.
Sure.
How did that explain to everybody how critical this was for survivors this time and for organizations? What happened during that time period and what's happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I started at LifeWay during the pandemic, and we felt like it was still important. It was a weird time for education just because everyone was busy worrying about how the pandemic would affect their
Right.
lives. So I think some of the thoughts were, should we even do education? But we really came to the conclusion it was never really a thought in the executive director's mind. It was never a thought in my mind, never a doubt anyways, that human trafficking is continuing 365 days, even in the middle of a pandemic. So halting education is harmful, and it's still important, that kind of awareness. Of course, you can divert it and change it, but it's still just as necessary, if not more necessary,
More,
right?
I would say more. Right.
Exactly. Especially with, for instance, like hospital staff, they're interacting with more clients. It's very likely that they may interact with the human trafficking survivor. So to leave them unprepared is just irresponsible from a place that is trying to provide education. To just halt it and wait for a good time. There is no perfect time for that. So just finding ways to adjust. So we did more digital education than we ever did before. And I think that ended up being a good opportunity
Yes.
that can continue simultaneously with any efforts being done in person. And then safe house wise during the pandemic, I think it was really important for us, despite the fact that I think there was a lot of panic, to kind of resist that and provide a continuity of care for the survivors. So for the in-house staff, they continued to come in without halting. The services went on as normal. Of course, there was adjustments, especially in a safe house setting that's very communal and people are sharing kitchens. And there's a community dinner once a week that was slightly adjusted just to make sure that we were doing our best as possible to prevent any further spread, which ended up working because we had no cases in the safe house of COVID. But as the best to our ability, just trying to continue it. And I think that ended up being very nice for our current residents who may otherwise be fearful that they can't get an apartment, or some experience job loss, but at least in a safe house setting, they knew that they could stay there and we would work with them and they wouldn't be kicked out. And it was a good place to be, all things considered, when everything was just in a state of uncertainty.
I mean, that's excellent, because I did hear stories of some safe houses where they couldn't take anybody, or they didn't have enough staff across the country. And so what happens to these people? And we know how a vulnerable community has become even more vulnerable during this whole pandemic. And how excellent LifeWay Network is, giving that sense of safety, that little safety net. Just, because I just was with somebody today, and she said to me, I've had nobody during the last year. And we were discussing that, and that really tugged at my heartstrings, thinking,
Heartbreaking.
right, she said, and she's strong, but she's like, it real tough not to have that kind of support she was used to getting. So LifeWay is doing an amazing job. What do you think the public, okay, Tori, let me ask you a question. How would you describe, we now live in a 24/7 digital world. This is what I think. I think the world, well, don't ask me. I think big tech owns all of us, owns everything. I think big tech's the government. I'm very focused on digital safety.
Yeah.
And training the parents and educating them about what's going on, and getting the kids who've grown up in captivity, as far as I'm concerned, starting the last, I guess, 20 to 30 years, it's just part of their lives, digital. What is your description today of human trafficking? What would you say?
What does it look like taking place today?
Yes, because we always use, which is true, we always use that same definition, the use of force, fraud, and coercion, which it is. But I'm trying to get everybody to understand that, and they kind of fight me on it, or they just don't know.
Interesting.
An image online, if somebody got you sextortion or something like that, that's a force, or that's a coercion, or that is, and they're like, really? They're like, we thought it was actually, the car, the truck, the across the state
Right.
lines. And I'm like, it's kind of transitioned. Of course, all of that we know happens, and that will always happen. But it's taken on this kind of
Oh yeah.
really heavily online kind of, where the predators are lurking all over and making money from it. And you've been such a strong advocate. You've been on the forefront. We're going to get into it a little bit. The child bride. I don't even like to say child brides, because to me,
Yes.
a child can't be a bride. But
Yes.
I feel like, oh, let me stop myself.
prostituted.
Exactly. So, end child marriage. Oh, that doesn't even sound right to me, because a child shouldn't be getting married or something.
Yeah, I hear you.
So now, I use the 18 no exceptions. I use it all. And you've been at the forefront of all of these, and certainly, even our Washington work, because you work in the city and you work state issues, you work federal level, Earn It Act we've had.
Yeah.
Tell us your impressions of online right now, and how you would describe this whole kind of almost transition with what's been happening.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that you're getting that pushback, because as you correctly mentioned, trafficking is very dynamic, right? I think people will find where there's a window of opportunity, where they can make profits, where there's a lack of accountability, and when there's vulnerable people, exploitative individuals, traffickers, third parties, companies will always find ways to conduct their business.
Absolutely.
So especially during the pandemic, where it's just a fact of life, children everywhere are on school online, they're on their tablets. That's just the new front of where they're headed and going. And I think I don't know who said it, but they're absolutely right that we are operating in a 21st century world on like archaic laws that just haven't been able to keep up with the technology that's coming out there, the new platforms, the new devices.
Yes. The law always lags behind technology. And that's been my saying in this household for a good 12 years now. The law, which I can't really figure out, the law should actually be ahead of the technology.
Yeah, proactive.
Right? Proactive, get in front of it. So I'm not understanding. Although we work on a lot of things together, with other advocates that are moving forward. For instance, New York State with 18 no exceptions.
Yes,
and you were right there on the forefront doing, I was doing the radio program that day and had to go in earlier. I would have been alongside, but I'm the biggest cheerleader. I even did a piece yesterday. I was called very last minute to do something. Somebody contacted me. They're like, minors can, and a host on a news show. She's like, Lynn, minors can get married in the United States. And she's been around. I'm like, yes, let me tell you about that. Again, lack of, education about it with the public, lack of understanding. Tell us about that. Child. I don't want to say child. I almost said child brides again. I don't want to say that. Minors getting. I got to train myself. Minors married.
It's true, because we don't have like a better term right now, but it's true. I think the more that we can separate the person from what's being done to them, that's a more accurate description. But it's true, I don't even have better vocabulary to describe that yet. But yeah, I think it's so great that you're talking about it. It was so fun to celebrate that win in the beginning of August and go out and rally and celebrate that New York was finally able to end child marriage under the age of 18, no exceptions. And I think it deserves being talked about, even though that win happened in the beginning of August, because once the law is implemented, we still have to make sure that the clerks are alerted about it and that the public knows what that means, so that the law is actually being practiced. So I think that's quite important. And I was so excited to celebrate that too, just because some of these policy initiatives that we're working on, they seem so slow, right? Like it takes forever to get.
They don't seem, they're just tremendous red tape, tremendously slow. especially during this pandemic, I feel like things have been, shoved aside,
Slower.
pushed under, people can't focus. Then you have to wait for the next session and things go on and on and on. But, thank goodness we have advocates like you, Tori Curbelo, and we also have Unchained at Last, everybody, unchainedatlast.org, only organization in the United States that works on forced marriages, working with women and, teenage girls, advocacy work, raising, because they are relentless in pursuing, attention for this. And thank goodness. But it's amazing. People are amazed that we only have 6 states banning this, and 2 recently, Rhode Island and New York. And so I must just say, I gave Governor Cuomo credit for it. He signed it. Thank goodness. I mean, that was something. Well, I mean, it came in the middle of all this chaos. So I thought at least, he did this. It sat for a while on his desk, as I like to say, but at least he did that, because it would have been crushing had he not, after all of the work and the chaos going on. And Rhode Island was fairly recently also. That's only 6 states. Really. So what are we going to do? We got 44 more. What's going on with this?
We got to get the rest of them. And I would add forced marriage to the list of topics that people don't consider about when they think about human trafficking. And so we also at LifeWay, we take in survivors who have experienced forced marriage.
That was my next question. Have you dealt with anybody at LifeWay that was trying to escape like a forced or a cultural or religion or something?
Oh yeah, for sure. We've had a couple of cases like that. We had one, I would say fairly recently, who was intaked, and the purpose of the arranged marriage, it was an arranged marriage, but it was really a forced marriage. And that was to secure papers for her partner, but she had no say in it. And then she was kind of stranded once here. She was separated from the community from which she came from. So I'm happy that we're able to service cases like that, because not every organization considers that a form of human trafficking. But it's the same criteria.
I call it human trafficking. I say it out loud. I think it's human trafficking.
The same kind of stuff, force, fraud, and coercion, and you're utilized usually for, even if the payment isn't direct, it's some form of indirect payment, or something of value, right?
Right.
So those papers were something of value. It can be, we also had a case where the man once married, he then forced the woman to sell like little trinkets and things of that nature. So sometimes also what we see is that the trafficking experiences are very compounded. So there's different types going on. So you could be simultaneously trapped into a forced marriage and then also forced to into the sex trade or to labor. So
forced labor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't talk about that enough. That's like a whole, it's so prevalent, even here, I'm in the middle of New York City, and I've noticed in the last 3 months, there are these young women on the West Side Highway selling cut up fruit and water bottles. They're on the median, like in the middle of the highway. And when there are different lights at different parts down when you get into the 50s. And when the light turns red, they run between the cars, carrying fruit and water bottles. People buy it. I've seen people just give them money when I'm in the car at the red light. They won't talk to me. They've got all these coolers. I've reached out to several people. I continue to do so. I don't know. It seems like forced labor. Somebody's dropping them off with these big coolers. And Tori, here was the heartbreaking thing. A few weeks ago, in the middle of the median, so how it's like raised up, they have some bushes in the middle and stuff. There was a baby carriage. And I turned around. It was the tiniest little, it was almost that stroller that's for like a bigger child, the bigger one with the handles. So I could see the child. Well, this was no child. This was like almost a newborn baby, a tiny.
Wow.
And it's usually like 4 or 6 girls on a couple of blocks. And I'm trying to do something about it, but
Yeah, I think you're right to be concerned about that. I think especially in jobs and roles where there's not a lot of oversight, it's very informal in how that's conducted. Like I even think about the teenagers on the trains who are like, hey, sign up to support my basketball team. all these kids are in basketball teams. I don't know that there's enough basketball teams in a place like New York where we don't really have facilities like courts and fields and
Right.
that. So I think it is really concerning. I'm not saying that all those folks are trafficked necessarily, but it's who is looking into that. Are people paying attention? Are people even considering that? But I think it's largely dismissed as, oh no, they're just trying to make money.
Right.
But
Or that's it.
question it.
I mean, I've had people say, no, they're just leave them alone. They're just trying to make some money. But when I see a baby in the middle of the highway, and these girls dodging in and out, and you can't really tell, they could be 15 or 25 because they wear baseball cap, full face mask, a hoodie, like over it. They always have long sleeves, leggings, like they're fully covered, even today, 95-degree heat or whatever it is outside. So you can't really tell their age. I'm working on it, but this is why, I suggest, because there's so much going on, so much chaos, so much during COVID, it's continuing. We have to become warriors. I mean, I really woke up one day. I'm like, you know what? I was working on some things with Washington, and things are good. Things are moving forward, but in the meantime, another vulnerable girl or boy, woman, something happens to them, and we don't have time. We have to be warriors in our own homes and communities. And you're doing an excellent job with education and raising awareness and being at the forefront, and your advocacy work is terrific. What do you want the public to know, and how can they help you at LifeWay Network?
Absolutely. I can always think of like 500 ways that they can help.
Well, obviously, always money's good, everybody. That's what, we all know that. But sometimes I have people say, I didn't do anything because I know you want money. I'm like, no, it's not always about money. Of course, that works. That's good. But it's not always about, money.
No, it's doing what you can. I think people are multifaceted. So that's why there's so many things that come to my head. I feel like there's so many ways that people can take action. Money is one aspect. I think also, if you belong to any kind of community group, that could be a church, a school, maybe you belong to some kind of, I don't know, like club of some sort, definitely invite us in for training. Invite anyone who facilitates human trafficking in for training, because those group interactions are really, really important. And that's what we spend some time doing, is community outreach. But we also are happy when folks reach out to us and they're interested and want to bring the learnings to their own communities. So that's a tremendous way to take action, is be a liaison in that way.
Yeah. And I think also most people just want, what I love about LifeWay and what we're trying to do with the Warriors, always provide resources and solutions.
Sure.
We can talk, everybody talks. We've got to hand people solutions. We've got to hand people the resources. They don't, listen, it's how society also is today. And again, I'm going to preface that with, everybody's been so busy in the last 18, 19 months with COVID and somewhat crazed, handing them the solutions, handing them what to do. So I think the training from you and LifeWay Network to come in, do it so they know. And again, these issues, I always say to myself, it's like a big wheel with a lot of spokes. It all kind of goes, it's the labor trafficking, it's domestic violence. These are all things that kind of all fit together, and people are so overwhelmed, they'll tune out, So we've got to focus on, as you're doing, education, raising awareness without too much, because then they really, and you can speak about this if you want, things are escalating.
Yeah.
How about let's talk about the full decriminalization of the sex trade in New York, if you'd like to, Tori Curbelo, that I am livid about.
Yes.
Nobody's talking about it. I'm bringing it up every single day to different people, community leaders, the public, and people say to me, what? No. And I'm like, yes. What is going on with this?
Oh gosh, where do I even start? Are you referring to the DAs and the uprising in Brooklyn?
Let's start with, what is the full, according to you, Tori Curbelo, the full decriminalization of the sex trade? How would you describe that?
Yeah, let's take a step back. Thank you for doing that. So a full decriminalization of the sex trade means that everyone is decriminalized. And when we mean by that is the buyers, traffickers, those who profit and exploit, everybody. I think sometimes we only think about certain parties, like those who are prostituted. Maybe that's what we think about, but a full decrim means that everything is decriminalized and it can just operate without any penalties or consequences whatsoever.
Now let's take it a step further. When everybody's running amok, doing what they want, because I've had people say to me, oh, full decrim, that sounds good. And I'm like, no, let me explain. I want to know how this message got switched somehow.
Yeah.
It also means nobody's being held responsible, the traffickers, the pimps, the illicit massage spa owners, or I don't know what these places are all over. And what does that mean if nobody's held responsible? Now, what would you say that means? With talk about demand.
Absolutely. So sex trafficking, all the forms of trafficking, they follow the principles of basic supply and demand. So any kind of demand for cheap goods, for instance, or cheap labor and commercial sex, exploiters realize that they can fulfill that demand and they want to meet that demand by supplying individuals. And the problem is when there aren't enough consenting adults to meet that demand, third parties will use vulnerable populations. They'll use anyone that they can exploit to meet that demand and make profits. So what happens is if we fully decriminalize everything, that might sound good, but it's very, very simplistic. That means that they can operate and they won't be held accountable for that. They can facilitate harm and there's legally nothing that anyone can do about it because it's been decriminalized essentially. So it might sound great in theory. I think that's how it's been marketed, right? That how about we just decriminalize everything and it'll be safer, but that is a total leap that things will become safer because we're decriminalizing actions. And by decriminalizing everything, we're actually allowing the demand to continue and the demand won't stay stagnant. It'll just increase because buyers are not going to buy one time and be like, okay, I got my fix, I'm done. They're going to want to continue. It's never going to be enough. It'll get more violent. It'll become more harmful and they'll want more and more folks. And those who want to do it willingly are a very, very small minority, very, very small minority. The majority of, or many of the folks in the commercial sex industry, when you unravel their past, there's tons of history of neglect, sexual abuse, many who are minors, for instance. There's just a lot there.
They don't want to do it. They don't wake up.
Yeah, no one does.
Who wakes up and says, oh, I'm going to be a sex worker, which we don't believe in that phrase, sex worker.
I like that phrase. Yeah,
I agree. They try to market it like that. They try to, work at the library or work at CVS and be a sex worker. It's the most ridiculous thing. We do know, we have plenty of studies that show some of them, 97% of prostituted people say they do not want to do this. And that's what people have to understand. So it is a form definitely of human trafficking, of sexual exploitation. We have to get back on this. We have something called the equality model.
Yes.
And we have to talk about that. I'm talking about it every day. What is the equality model?
Absolutely.
Everybody needs to know about that because I feel like everybody hears, oh, full decrim, or they see sex worker or something. And
right.
They don't hear when I say, we have something called the equality model. They're like, what's that? I never heard about that.
Yeah, that's really true. So the equality model would be a complete culture shift, and why you're right that we have to educate about it. So it's different than a full decrim. The equality model takes into consideration that it's not as simplistic as all parties are equal. Sellers, facilitators, traffickers, those who are prostituted, they're not by any means equal. And the equality model tries to adjust that. So instead of just decriminalizing everything, it would decriminalize the work for the prostituted individual, who's usually a woman, sometimes a minor, We know the story there, but continue to penalize traffickers as well as buyers. And taking into consideration that one of the reasons that the parties are not equal is because the profile of someone who is prostituted and someone who is buying, it's very, very different. On one hand, you have someone that can afford to purchase commercial sex. They tend to be white males. They tend to have discretionary income. And then on the other side, the prostituted person is someone that's just struggling to make ends meet. Many are minority women. A lot of the women we service, majority of the women anyways that we service in the safe house are minority women. And there's an imbalance there. There's a complete imbalance. So you can't say that that's completely consensual when our dynamic is completely off.
Yes, that's something people say to me, oh, well, what two, consenting adults do is their business. And so I explain, well, it's not really, consenting on both sides. And then I've actually had a lot of men say to me, what are you talking about? I'm helping her out. I'm giving her money.
Yeah, that's what
I have to explain.
Yeah.
You touched upon, because I'm hearing a lot of, let's just go back a little bit. A couple of people have said to me, why is all this happening? Because the bottom line is money. There's lots of money to be made. If there's full decriminalization, nobody's held responsible to fill that demand. They're going to keep going and going, and they're going to keep going and get younger and younger. And it's already there here in New York.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot from law enforcement, and the demand is now younger. We have children. And it means, you can have a brothel next door. It'll all be legal in any community in New York. Times Square could be, I don't know, a red light district. It'll be fine. So we have to fight this, and we are fighting it tremendously, but we got to get
true.
We got to get back out there after Labor Day. We don't have time to waste on this one with everything going on. We've got to get back.
We need to balance out the conversation. It's definitely been one-sided. And you're right, by the way, about the just the money behind it. Because I think also, in addition to the parties we just mentioned, there's a lot of other corporate interests. Like you could have an operation where a driver is benefiting, a bouncer, someone running a hotel. So there's a lot of there's a lot of financial incentive to be like, oh, it's consenting adults, everything is good. It's just, we're just getting in the way of that. There's a lot more that needs to be excavated there, even though it's not a fun reality or not as fun to talk about. But that's just the reality.
But I always say to people, I don't think they realize, because if it's not like right at their front door, they think, okay, I don't want to think about it. This will trickle down, all of this. It affects all of us in every community. It affects our children. Again, if there's a demand, as an example, the kids are all online, where are they going to find demand? Right? Our vulnerable communities, as you pointed out, become more vulnerable, because that woman or girl might just need a meal, or have to feed a baby or something drastic. And people don't really think, look, it's all of this is dark and ugly. I don't blame people. They're overwhelmed. They don't want to think about it, but we have to think about it, because the predators are winning. And thank goodness for a place like LifeWay Network. Why don't we have more LifeWay networks? Is it, I guess it's money, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question why there aren't more safe houses. To be honest, I don't think I could answer that. Maybe it's just initiative, maybe it's just money. But I think the need for housing is one of the biggest for.
I say it's the biggest. It's the biggest, because I have law enforcement that says, Lynn, where are we putting people? We have nowhere to put them. So
primary need.
They used to say to me, oh, well, she's better off in jail for a night or 2 nights than out on the streets. But in their minds, they would think, okay.
Yeah, that's a bad.
No, but now, of course, nobody's going to jail in New York. It's kind of just, with our DAs, and there's a lot of chaos here. And do you have anything to say about anything that's going on in New York with your expertise? You don't have to.
Yeah. What I think, honestly, we're already hearing murmurings that Brooklyn is particularly because the DA has decided basically to not go after, and or the perception is that they're not going to prosecute anyone. So I think that influences who's arrested. I think it's a perception, right? I don't know that that was flatly the policy, but the way the policy is interpreted, law enforcement will only go after who they think will actually end up being stuck with charges. So we're hearing murmurings that the sex trafficking is getting out of control in Brooklyn. But what I think is that it's going to get worse, that that's just the tip of the iceberg, because trafficking is usually a process. It's usually not something that happens overnight, like a policy is decided one day and then tons of trafficking happens. There's a grooming process that happens that can take time. So, and traffickers are willing to invest in that time as well. They're willing to build a relationship because they know that'll further entrap the person. So I think whatever is being reported in the New York Post, whatever is happening now, that's just going to get worse over time. I think whatever
It
the
is
pandemic.
worse. I have people sending me pictures, actually, Corona Queens. So we know about Brooklyn because that's been out there. Like you said, the New York Post, we've had buzz about that. Flushing Queens, Corona Queens.
Yeah.
I've been sent pictures of teenage girls, they look, and women. And we're talking all hours of the day. It's not nighttime, openly walking around during the day. I'm also told that Hunts Point up in the Bronx, which has always been sort of a prostitution area, is now going to be, I don't even want to say this, a hub for minors.
Yeah.
And now this is shocking. And word on the street is full decrim, which is why we have to be warriors and fight so hard, Tori Curbelo. They're already talking, they're flooding into New York State, anticipating full decrim and bringing already a lot of people here. So we all have our work cut out for us. Give us some parting thoughts about LifeWay Network. Are there anything, anything in the future we need to know about? Again, everybody, lifewaynetwork.org. Tori, is that the best way you want everybody to follow?
Yeah.
I always recommend the website. When I rattle off, the Twitter, the Facebook, this, everything's on the website.
Yeah, it's all on the website.
I don't want to overwhelm everybody, and I like to direct everybody always. It's my new thing. Go to the websites where you'll find all of that. Lifewaynetwork.org. What's the future holding? What's happening? Dreams. Tell me anything.
Yeah, dreams. I mean, I hope that, wow, I have so many dreams. I think one of the biggest dreams is that we're able to counter the narrative of the sex trade. I'm seeing more and more and more of it. And I'm hoping that we can all be warriors. We can all partner to offer a different perspective on that, because the public is kind of only hearing one side of it. And part of that has to do with money. There's money and an incentive to hearing one side. So my hope is that the public becomes more aware of the reality and harms of the sex trade. And I hope we can advance the equality model and other policies that that these harmful narratives are forcing us to implement as well. So I think my parting words is to be involved, whether that's having a conversation with someone that you know, helping us to spread social media posts that counter the narrative. That all helps in raising awareness.
Tori Curbelo, Director of Education, Advocacy, Policy, everything at LifeWay Network here in New York, lifewaynetwork.org. And also, I'm so honored that you're an advisory council member of Lynn's Warriors. We have a lot of great things in the works.
Yes.
I need to fill you in about a lot of things going on. And we thank you for your expertise and for sharing today and raising awareness. Again, we need the public on our side. I have a lot of people come to me. They're like, I didn't know it. How can I help? Getting them boots on the ground involved, I think will make a tremendous difference. So thank you, Tori Curbelo, for all of your work and the work of LifeWay Network.